On the banks of the Danube River in Budapest, just below the magnificent Parliament building, there's a haunting memorial. It looks deceptively simple. It's a scattering of some 60 pairs of shoes, cast in iron, lined up along the river's edge. They're 1940s style shoes. Men's work boots, women's low heels, children's small lace-ups. The kind of shoes that once walked cobblestone streets, stood in synagogue aisles, scuffed schoolroom floors. These shoes mark the place where Hungarian Jews were ordered to remove their footwear before being shot into the river by members of the Arrow Cross, the fascist party in 1944 and 45. Today, these shoes still sit there, permanent witnesses, ordinary objects made unbearably holy by memory. When I stood there in Budapest this summer, I felt the weight of Jewish history pressing against me. The shoes are silent, yet they speak of absence, loss. They remind us that to be a Jew is never simply to live in the present moment. We are a people always aware of the weight of history. In July, Greg and I visited Budapest, Prague, Vienna, and Berlin. And I've been to European Holocaust memorials before, but this was my first visit since October 7th. And everywhere we went, the past was overlaid with the present. On those shoes on the Danube, there were yellow ribbons tied with the words, "Bring them home." Hostage posters clung stubbornly to synagogue walls in Prague. In the lobby of the Jewish Museum in Berlin, a video of hostage families played on loop, impossible to ignore. While attending synagogues at one of Berlin's 19th century shuls, with its high dome and gilded arches, I felt as if I were time traveling. It was an amazing experience to witness what it must have been like amid the flourishing of German Reform Judaism before the Shoah. The cantor wore a tall hat. There was an organ with a lofted choir. But I was jolted in my seat when the music suddenly transitioned to the congregation singing Achenu, just as we just did, accompanied on the organ. Rabbi Danny Gordis, a leading voice whom I read closely to understand what is happening in Israel today, shared an anecdote on his blog last year. It struck me as a clear example of an awareness of this moment. He wrote this: "During one of my many recent somber moments, with soldiers dying as Israel remained mirrored, if not endless, in Gaza, more than 100 hostages still in captivity, almost 100,000 internal refugees from the north unable to return to their homes, I texted a friend and wrote, 'This wasn't in the Aliyah handbook.' And he replied instantly, 'No, it wasn't in the Aliyah handbook, but it was in all the history books.'" Gordis continues, "I stared dumbly at the text. He was right, so obviously, indisputably right. Amid fear for my country and my family, why had I taken no comfort in the fact that through this horrible period, though it was new to today's Israel, it wasn't entirely new to the Jewish people?" As a Jewish people, we have an interesting relationship with history. There were ancient historians whose writings help us understand the life of our ancestors in antiquity, such as Josephus. But the first major occurrence for rabbis to write seriously about history in the context of their own generation's experience was in the 16th century, in the wake of the Spanish Inquisition. That generation was very conscious of the fact that something unprecedented had taken place in their lived experience that was felt to have altered the face of Jewry and history itself. The historian Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi once wrote about ruptures, these moments when Jewish history breaks open and nothing is ever the same again. These were not simply events. They were breaks in continuity, forcing Judaism to reimagine itself from the ground up. I think we can all agree that October 7th was a rupture. We don't yet know, I don't think, how it will reshape Jewish life, but we know that it will. It already has. And what makes this moment different from memorials like the shoes on the Danube is that we're not looking back from a distance. We're in it. We are consciously living through a rupture as it unfolds. This is one of the profound challenges of being a Jew. We never simply live in one moment. We live with an awareness that every moment is connected to what came before and what will come after. You can even hear it in God's name. The unpronounceable 4 letters of God's proper name, Yud He Vav He, contain within them all of the tenses of the verb to be. Haya, God was. Hoveh, God is. Yihiyeh, God will be. God is not confined to a single text, and neither are we. Hebrew itself plays with time in ways that feels almost mystical. Sometimes a verb in the past tense points to the future, and a verb in the future tense points to the past. The very grammar of our tradition insists that the lines of time are more porous than we think. Rosh Hashanah, this holiday itself, reminds us that Jewish time is never only about now. One midrash teaches that Rosh Hashanah is not actually the date of the beginning of creation. That creation, day 1, which Joyce chanted earlier, actually happened on the 25th of Elul. Rather, Rosh Hashanah commemorates the day that Adam was created. Today we are not thinking of the first day of creation, but the 6th, the day when humanity was formed. Another midrash about Adam relates, when the sun sank at the end of the very first Shabbat, darkness began to set in, and Adam was terrified, thinking, surely the darkness will envelop me. Now, it didn't happen on Friday night to him because God didn't let the sun set on the first Shabbat, according to this midrash. It was a special honor given to that first Shabbat. So the first time the sun ever set was that Shabbat late afternoon. Imagine that scene, the sun setting with Adam not knowing if it would ever rise again. No wonder he was scared. So what did God do for Adam in his moment of fear? God made him 2 flints, which he struck against each other, and light came forth. And Adam said a blessing that should be familiar to you. Baruch atah Adonai, borei me'orei ha'esh. The same blessing we say at Havdalah when we put up our hands to reflect the flame. God invited Adam to take matters into his own hands by commanding him to gather supplies, those 2 flint stones, to make sparks and fire in order to eliminate the darkness in his midst. Adam was pushed to figure out somehow, some way to kindle a flame, to push away that darkness. This Rosh Hashanah, I think we're also being asked to stand, just as Adam did, at the threshold of time with darkness around us. We feel the weight of the past, present, and future all converging. And so as we gather here today, not only to mark the turning of a calendar, we also ask ourselves, what does it mean to be a Jew today, in this moment? What are the tools in our hands that will allow us to find that spark, to hold the rupture of today, the weight of our history, and the hope for our future? The author Sarah Hurwitz, in her brand new book, As a Jew, which Rabbi Dan referenced, Erev Rosh Hashanah, describes how she came to realize that Jewish life is not only about remembering history, but about consciously choosing how to live as a Jew in the present. She writes of Judaism as a living inheritance, not a museum piece, but something we are called to wrestle with and make our own. Hurwitz reminds us that Jewish identity is not defined solely by what has been done to us, but how we respond, how we deepen our commitments, how we choose to shape Jewish life now. In a moment of rupture, that invitation feels especially urgent. I think that one of the most important things we can do, like Adam picking up those flints, is to take action that embraces hope. I want to offer 4 pathways to find Jewish stability that can anchor us in this moment. Not to think of ourselves as passive vessels carrying the past from one generation to the next, but as active agents in the continuation of the Jewish story. You might find all 4 of these speak to you, maybe just 1 or 2. But in any case, the new year is a good time to plant yourself more deeply in them. The first is community. Show up. Knowing that you are part of a Jewish community, a place of support and strength, it fills us up. There is something so stabilizing about being in a multi-generational space like ours. To be in shul on Shabbat, hearing children's voices mingle with the words of elders, to feel the rhythm of Jewish life that carries us all. The second is spiritual practice. Whether praying in a minyan or offering the personal prayer of your heart, our spiritual practice grounds us. It helps us to live in the present by quieting the noise that's always around us. We live in a world that is constantly clamoring for our attention. Prayer, meditation, ritual, these are tools we have for creating an island of stillness in the storm. The third is study. Jewish texts are endlessly rich with wisdom, and in every generation our people has turned to them for guidance. Today, more than ever, Jewish learning is accessible. Classes and podcasts, online resources, chavruta partners, a partner for study. What once required entering a Beit Midrash, a formal house of study, is now open and accessible to all of us. In a time of rupture, study reminds us that our ancestors wrestled with questions as hard as ours, and that we can draw strength from their insights. And the fourth are acts of chesed. Doing for others is among the most profound ways we can claim our agency as Jews. Each act of kindness, visiting the sick, feeding the hungry, comforting the brokenhearted, reaffirms our covenantal responsibility. It's how we embody the presence of God in the world. Each of these 4 anchors is a pathway to claiming our Jewish agency. Together, they remind us that as Jews, we are not just inheritors of history, we are actors in this moment. We have an important role to play in realizing our place in this chain of tradition. This past Shabbat, we read Parashat Nitzavim. We'll read it again, actually, on Yom Kippur morning as well. And in that parasha, Moses gathers the people and says, Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem lifnei Adonai Elohechem. You are standing today, all of you, before Adonai, your God. The commentators noticed, why the word hayom, today? Why emphasize hayom, this day? A midrash explains that Moses wasn't speaking only to the people standing there in the desert. He was speaking to every Jew who ever lived, past, present, and future, all of us included. This is what it means to be a people of memory. We don't just recall the past, we stand in covenant with it. We don't just anticipate the future, we are bound to it. In ordinary times, this might feel abstract or poetic, but in a moment of rupture like ours, it is very real. When I stood in Berlin this summer, I thought many times of German Jews in the early 20th century. They were integrated, confident, flourishing in culture and science and art, like us in so many ways. And then, almost overnight, their world was ripped apart. I don't believe today is 1938. But I do believe we share with those Jews the danger of forgetting that Jewish life is always precarious, always bound up with memory. The challenge is to remember that we have the wisdom of memory to remind us that we have been here before. We know how to survive. We know how to carry each other through. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory once said, "To be a Jew is to be part of the most remarkable story ever lived, and every one of us has a chapter to write in that story." That is the call of this Rosh Hashanah. What will be our next chapter? Will it be despair, or will it be courage, faith, and hope? Will our children remember us as a generation that closed in on itself, or a generation that chose life, even in the shadow of rupture? We do not get to choose the era of Jewish history into which we are born, but we do get the opportunity to choose how we will live as Jews in our own time. So may this be a year in which we choose memory over forgetting, hope over despair, agency over passivity. May it be a year in which we, like our ancestors before us, transform rupture into resilience. Shana Tova.